As an aside, before we get started, as a young company commander, I went out to my motor pool one day and there was a guy and he was sitting on a chair and I said, "Hey, get up, we got motor stables going on. You got to get in there." And he goes, "Sir, I got a chit." I said, "You don't have a chit to sit down and watch everybody else work." And he goes, "Sir, I do." And I said, "What do you mean?" Showed me his chit. He said, I've got narcolepsy. I can't be around anything. Yeah, he was just waiting around to get processed. So I don't think anyone here has narcolepsy, but if you do and you have a chit, feel free to just doze off whenever you want. Otherwise, stay awake and pay attention. I am Lieutenant General John Whistler, United States Naval Academy class of 1978. Oh, I didn't know if you guys had a class. That's the first time it's taken that long for your class to say 2022. Okay, that's a great tradition. I say that because I'm also the Distinguished Chair of Leadership. I work in the Stockdale Center. My mission in life is to make sure that this august institution continues to graduate exceptional leaders. My personal goal for the class of 2022, how many of you have recognized me from a previous appearance anywhere? Okay, some of you. You all saw me Sunday night, Plebe Parents Weekend. I was that old guy that talked to you in Alumni Hall. Okay, same guy, different suit. Why does that matter? What that means is you and I sort of started this thing together, right? And hopefully in 4 years, when the class of 2022 crosses that stage in Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium, you as a class are going to be able to say, we are the best class that's ever graduated, and we have the best leaders that have ever left this institution. You see, because that's what it's all about. It's all about leadership, okay? The title of that slide, Leadership is a Relationship, you should recognize, right? That's what NL110 is. That's what the title of the course is. The piece below it, though, is what it means. It's what they tried to give you this semester, a great collection of thought-provoking ideas, concepts that you are going to use to make yourself a selfless servant leader. That rascal right there, that's me. Midshipman 4th Class, John Whistler, summer of 1974. We took that picture in this building somewhere. I don't exactly remember where, but I remember coming over here because it was hotter than Hades and it was in August and I didn't really like SDBs, but now there's 2 of us in suits today. Well, 3 of us. All right, so we're all looking sharp in our SDBs. Why does it matter? I've been where you are. I didn't get it right all the way. I have built some experience. After 39 plus years as a Marine, I sort of have had some experiences that I'm going to try and share with you. What I'm going to try and do today is take that idea that leadership is a relationship, and I'm going to try and put it into a framework that allows you to take those tools that you got and make them a little bit more than something you study to try and get through the exam. To take them and to make you a better leader. To build a relationship, you have to know who you are. You have to know yourself. This semester, they gave you some tools to sort of figure out who you are as a leader. You're never going to be able to know the people you lead if you don't know yourself. Knowing who you are is critical to being able to develop yourself as a leader. You're building relationships every day. You've been building relationships since you got here on I-Day. But you need to be building those relationships for the right reasons. You need to build those relationships not for you, but for the people that you lead. And each of you are leading in a critical way right now. You're leading your peers. The women and the men that sit to your right and to your left, you have a significant responsibility to lead them. You've already been given some guidance about sleep, but I would offer it translates to many other things that you'll do around the yard. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. You see, understanding who you are is critical because you're going to be the leader that you are. Doesn't mean you can't be a better you. And in fact, I would offer you have to be a better you. You have to be a you that is a naval you. Whether you go into the Navy or the Marine Corps matters not. You join the naval service. You have to grow up in that framework, that culture that is the naval service. But you can't build on it if you don't know who you are. You can't navigate if you don't know where you're starting from. So you got to know yourself. But you have to be yourself. You can't decide you're going to be a Chesty Puller or an Admiral Halsey or anybody else, any other leader that you think is just an amazing leader. You can't be them. You have to be you. It doesn't mean you can't take on some of their traits, but at the end of the day, you have to be who you are. And understanding who you are is going to allow you to build that relationship. Once you know yourself, you can then get to know others. It's not going to happen by a 144 character text. It's not going to happen by you having them fill out some piece of paper with some critical information and you read about it. It's going to happen when you expend your resource, expend your time. You do that kneecap to kneecap discussion to find out who they are. And hopefully you've been already doing that with your classmates, to find out who they really are. Because at the end of the day, you want them to be exceptional leaders, just like you want yourself to be an exceptional leader. 34 months in Iraq, the one thing I realized was we never had too many good leaders in the battlefield. You want everybody to be a good leader. You want to know the sailors and Marines that you'll lead someday, and you want them to be good leaders. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. The guy on the left-hand side of that slide is General John A. Lejeune, 13th Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, but more importantly, perhaps, a graduate of the United States Naval Academy class of 1888. Was not commissioned as a Marine until 1890. In those days, you graduated, spent 2 years as a midshipman aboard ship, came off your sea tour, and then went to wherever you were going to go. He chose to be a Marine. He was told at the time that he was too smart to be a Marine. Either he didn't believe him, or they were kidding, or a combination of both, but he decided to take his commission as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. He is the founder of leadership thought, not only in the Marine Corps, but I would offer across the military service. And more importantly than that, he's also the father of professional military education in the Marine Corps. He founded the Marine Corps University, what was then called the Marine Corps Institute. He was a leader passionate about those that he led, a man who understood that leadership was about a relationship. The definition that leadership is the sum of those qualities of intellect, human understanding, and moral character that enables a person to inspire and control a group of people successfully is his definition. It's one that I have sort of tried to model, to live, to develop myself as a leader. You see, a lot of people will take this leadership and immediately jump to control. But really the leadership piece is about inspiration. Because if you inspire those people that you lead, you won't have to control them. The only control will be to make sure that they just don't charge off too far and too fast. You see, as a leader, you want to inspire. You want to inspire because as a leader, you want to be revered. You don't want to be feared. It's not about control. It's about inspiration. You want to be respected. It's not about do as I say, not as I do. It's about being selfless. That selfless servant leader. You see, you got to ask yourself, you've all come here for different reasons. You all showed up at the Naval Academy for different reasons. Don't know what they are, and frankly, doesn't really matter right now. You're here. What matters is why you're still here and why you will be here, should you so choose to be here in 4 years, to walk across that stage in Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. I would offer the reason that you're here is you're here to be a warrior, to be a selfless servant warrior leader. You all joined the naval service while our country is at war. Just like the men and women that you'll go out there and lead. And if you think there's any doubt about the fact that the nation is still in war, yesterday we lost a 4th Army Special Forces soldier killed in Afghanistan by an improvised explosive device. There's no doubt his family and his friends and his colleagues and the people that he led and those that led him truly understand we're a nation at war. So you must embody this idea that you're going to become a warrior. Does anybody know how General Lejeune described the relationship between the leader and the led? Anybody? General Luzerne's description of that relationship between the leader and the led is as of a parent to a child. In his writings, he actually said a father to a son, because in his day, 1917, when he wrote it, there were no female Marines. 1918, we got the very first female Marines. But in his definition of leadership, it was that parental relationship, father to son, or teacher to scholar. Not superior. There is no, you have no superiors. You have seniors, you have peers, you have subordinates, but no one is superior to you. I'm not superior to you. No one that I ever led did I ever stand up in front of an audience and even think that I would be considered to be superior, because I'm not. But I was senior by billet, by rank, by responsibility. So think about that relationship, that warrior relationship, parent to child, teacher to scholar. That's what this definition is trying to get you to think about. What you got so far in this semester has been exceptionally valuable. You've gotten this collection, this sort of, you can call it your backpack, your toolkit, it doesn't matter. You got a bunch of tools, a bunch of concepts, a bunch of thoughts, a bunch of ideas that you need to think about. You got sort of the nature and nurture part, right? You got this idea of system 1 and system 2. System 1, fast, or you don't even think about it, just happens. But it can be flawed, right? With bias, with perhaps you don't know enough. And then you had system 2, a more thoughtful approach to making decisions. What I would offer is, as a warrior, what you want to do is you want to take the time right now. You want to think about those sort of system 2 things, those ideas of understanding the people you lead, of knowing who they are, and then be able to compress that decision cycle down such that system 1 and system 2 are almost the same. That your system 1 is, your sort of natural, is almost influenced by the fact that you've thought about what you need to do, and you've thought about the people that you're going to lead, and you care about them in that selfless servant leader way, that you're going to make the right decision that best benefits them, that you're going to build those relationships that best benefit the greater good, not just you as an individual. You talked about perception and bias, which can influence, obviously, your decisions. You talked about personality types. You probably learned some stuff about who you are, or at least who all the tests say that you are. And if it makes you feel any better, I've taken the MBTI now a whole bunch of times, and I'm not always the same, which really confuses my wife, to be honest. But I think sometimes those things. But you did some other tests, right? You did Strength Finder, I think. A really good test, because it's going to tell you who you are, not who you want to be, but where you're starting from, that known navigation point. Talked about motivations and mindsets. As I said, your motivation to come here was one thing. Your motivation to stay here needs to be something different. It needs to be to focus on being a warrior. And then you moved into the fundamentals of personhood, right? All good stuff. You talked about attachment. You talked about influence. You talked about power. And I'm sure as you sat in the class and you were talking about influence and power, and people were, at least initially when you read about it, you were thinking, I'm a plebe. I have no influence or power. And I would offer that there is nothing further from the truth. That you have the most amazing power you have right now. And that influence and power is over yourself and your classmates. It's the peer leadership responsibility that you had starting back in plebe summer. You just didn't realize it. But think back. The midshipman leadership that took you through plebe summer pushed you to peer leadership. It wasn't about you. It was about the greater good of your squad or your platoon or your company. If you were superb but everybody else in your squad was miserable, you had failed. That's the idea. You have tremendous influence and power. You can make this class something special by making yourself accountable and by making your classmates accountable. And that attachment, that culture that you have, gives you and helps you to build that power. You talked about the culture. You talked about socialization, values, talents, and strengths. If you don't know what those are, then you're going to have a hard time as a leader. If you don't understand the people you lead in the context of all those things, all those ideas of nature and nurture. The reason I put this slide up here, the most important person in this slide right here, this guy, Sergeant Marcus Gold. Sergeant Gold was my personal security detachment in 2005 and 6 in Iraq. Sergeant Gold, that's me. Brigadier General Whistler, that's my Sergeant Major, my Chief of Staff, my aide, and all of these guys. That's the personal security detachment. This is our corpsman. Not sure why the corpsman has a shotgun. I think he just wanted to look cool in the photo. Gotta admit, sitting there with a solid black shotgun, it looks pretty cool. This guy right here, Corporal Adcox. Corporal Adcox played linebacker for the University of Tennessee. Suffered a very severe shoulder injury. He lost his scholarship. He decided he would join the Marine Corps. He rehabbed his shoulder, joined the Marine Corps. Now, you'll note the size difference between Adcox, a rather large human, and General Whistler, who is, no shrinking violet, but certainly outsized by this massive human. Sergeant Gold decided that I needed somebody in my vehicle that could physically control my whereabouts. And so Sergeant Gold, understanding our culture as Marines and wanting to fight, understanding that perhaps I would venture away from the cocoon of safety, he put Adcox in charge of making sure I went where I needed to go. In January of 2006, we were making a movement. We were leaving our base, Al Taqadum, just outside Habbaniyah, a base built by the British in 1928. The original control tower still stands there. We were leaving there to go to Camp Fallujah, which was on the other side of the city of Fallujah, and as we were making our movement towards Camp Fallujah, we were attacked by a suicide vehicle-borne IED. A Chevy Suburban that estimated by the EOD guys to have had 18 152 millimeter artillery shells in it. When it exploded, there was significant damage to that vehicle. The only thing that was left was the rear axle. And we took some damage to our vehicles and some minor casualties, but no one was severely injured. And unlike the procedure where we should have just continued to move, the lead vehicle stopped, causing all 4 vehicles in our convoy to stop, and then everyone dismounted the vehicles. At that point, we were engaged with small arms and rocket-propelled grenade fire. And at that same time, we saw what we thought were the triggermen who had initiated the IED. And so we engaged in small arms combat with them and with our crew-served weapons. But Sergeant Gold, this guy right here, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, not Sergeant Major, not Brigadier General, not Colonel, not Lieutenant, took charge of the situation, understanding the responsibility was to get us safely to our next place, that it wasn't necessarily to engage the enemy. Quickly called to the lead vehicle, found out that they hadn't stopped for any reason, in other words, they weren't disabled, that we moved forward. Got everybody back in the vehicles and away we went. I would offer saving us from suffering at least casualties, if not losing the lives, because the enemy had a superior situation on us. You see, Sergeant Gold had studied all those things that you've been given. He'd studied about us. He knew our culture. He knew our attachments. He knew who we were as individuals. He knew that we would prefer to fight rather than to flee. And he knew that from myself to the Sergeant Major on down, given the opportunity, we would probably do that. You see, he compressed that Decision 1, Decision 2 cycle because he understood what his mission was. He understood what he needed to do, and he got us out of there. You then moved on and talked about leadership skills. Just so you don't think I threw this slide in here because of what took place on Friday with the death of President George Herbert Walker Bush, this slide was in here last week when I talked to all of your classmates. I put this slide in here to talk about the importance of those essential leadership skills, those skills that are reflected on the left-hand side of that slide. Persuasion and influence, critical thinking, reflection, resilience, purpose, and goals. See, this photo is taken, this is President George Herbert Walker Bush, this is the National Security Advisor, General Brent Scowcroft. This is President Boris Yeltsin. At the time of this photo, he'd been president of Russia for approximately 6 months. It was in June of 1992. We had just returned, actually, from the Naval Academy, where President Bush had taken President Yeltsin out for a little cruise around the Severn. And they had talked about how could he, President Bush, help in the relationship to help President Yeltsin build a successful Russia. Their economy was in a very difficult place. There was crime was starting to build in the country. There were protests. Things were not good in Russia, but understanding his persuasion, his influence, understanding the place America held at that time as a leader in the world, President Bush reached out to build that relationship. Not for his own personal good, but for the good of the people of the United States. He reached out to see what he could do and how he could help Russia through the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But there's even perhaps a better example of this, about being a selfless servant leader, about building relationships. Early in his presidency, President Bush was approached by his team of economic advisors, and they told him that he needed to raise taxes. And in the very same meeting, his political advisors told him that just couldn't happen, that he had run on a platform that said no new taxes. In fact, the exact quote was, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And the political advisor said, if you raise taxes, you run the very real risk of not being reelected for your second term as president. But you see, President Bush was a man who was an unbelievable critical thinker, who took time to reflect. He had resilience. He knew what his purpose and his goals were, which was to protect and take care of the American people. And so the economic advisor said this will have a significant impact on the middle and the lower class, most of America. And the political guys said, hey, you can't do this. And he said, and then the political guys said, hey, could you do it later? And the economic guy said, you could do it later, but still going to have immediate impact on the people. So President Bush said this is a pretty straightforward decision. If I decide not to raise taxes, the only one who benefits is me, potentially. If I do decide to raise taxes, most of America is impacted. He said it's very simple. We're going to raise taxes. Told his political guys, you figure out how to get me reelected. Selfless servant leadership to the people of the United States. Years later, in a different forum, and I happened to be present, he was asked, President Bush was asked, do you ever regret not getting your second term? And he said, no. He said, no, I don't regret not getting my second term. He said, had I been elected for my second term, I'm pretty confident my son never would have been elected President of the United States. Selfless servant leadership to his family, to the nation, to the international community. That's what these essential leadership skills do. It matters not the level at which you are operating. It matters not if it's peer leadership. It's the same essential leadership skills. You see, President Bush, he showed intellectual growth. He showed compassion. He showed unquestionable moral character. But it doesn't just happen at the highest levels. It's not just going to happen there. It's going to happen at the level that you're at. After you talked about the essential leadership skills, you got into the virtues of a leader. Now I'm going to, this is a little disclaimer here, and you're taking notes. Do not write these down as the school solution to the virtues of a leader, because they are different. Those are not the exact same ones. So I don't want anybody to fail NL110, because that's like the one question you get wrong, and then you hearken back to General Whistler got you all gooned up on the test, all right? But what those are what I call the virtues of the warrior ethos. What I'm trying to tell you is you've got to take it out of that context and put it into the warfighting context. And for me, these are those elements of the warrior ethos. I remember them by the acronym CHISEL: courage, honor, integrity, selflessness, loyalty. Why chisel? Because a chisel can take just sort of an inanimate object and turn it into something that's of value or of beauty, right? Something as hard as my head or your head. and to get you to think about something in a totally different way, a way that brings and puts meaning, puts that warrior meaning in this case into it. Something as hard as your spirit or my spirit, you get stuck where you're at, the chisel. Why are these virtues important? These virtues are important because they defeat the inward vices. They defeat the inward vices of envy, of greed, of selfishness, of laziness and dishonesty, and of indiscriminate harming of others. Indiscriminate harming of others through word, through deed, through action or inaction. You see, I've talked to a fairly significant amount so far about you being a peer leader, right? Well, if you allow your classmates to not meet the standard, then you've basically given them tacit approval to be less successful than they should be, to be less professional than they need to be. The commandant and the superintendent this entire semester, right? They have focused on professionalism, on the idea of being the best professional that you can be. And if you do not hold them accountable, your classmates that is, to that standard, then you are executing the indiscriminate harming of others. The standard you are walking past is the standard that you accept. Whether it's a uniform violation, whether it's them not knowing what they're supposed to do, whether they're not being in the right place at the right... Professionalism spans the breadth and the depth of everything it means to be a naval professional. And the sailors and Marines that you will go out and lead someday, the young women and men who have joined and put on the cloth of our nation in the Navy or the Marine Corps, expect that you will hold yourself to that high standard, and more importantly, will hold everyone in your organization to that standard. 30, 40, 50 young men and women entrusted to your charge, expect that you will help them to defeat the inward vices, that you will develop these virtues to do that. You've all been probably subject to some of that indiscriminate harming before, whether it's inappropriate use of electronic media, social media, whether it's just rumors or falsehoods or things about people, whether it's trying to climb to your own success over the failure of others. So how does that affect this guy right here? This is Lance Corporal Brandon Lara. Brandon Lara lost his life on July 19th, 2009. Not much older than most of you. He was a turret gunner in a 4-vehicle convoy. They were making their way out towards Al-Qaim in the very western parts of Anbar province. They were going through a little town called Rawa, and as they were moving through this town, an Al-Qaeda insurgent stepped around from the corner of a building and threw an armor-piercing grenade at Brandon Lara's vehicle. Brandon Lara was behind a .50 caliber machine gun and could have, within the rules of engagement, immediately engaged the insurgent with a .50 caliber machine gun. But Lance Corporal Lara knew that if you killed one innocent Iraqi, you would create 100 people who supported Al-Qaeda. It was sort of our mantra throughout our time in Iraq, but especially as we got to where things were turning in our favor. And so rather than engage with that .50 caliber machine gun, he reached inside the turret and he pulled out his M4 carbine, and with 2 well-aimed rounds, he dispatched the Al-Qaeda insurgent. But as he squeezed off that last round, the grenade exploded outside his turret, and he was killed in the blast. He could have done a lot of things. He could have gone back in the turret, but he knew that that insurgent would come back to kill, or at least attempt to kill, his fellow sailors and Marines. You see, he had selflessness. He had loyalty. He showed his courage. But when you talk about those inward vices, he overcame that very real opportunity for indiscriminate harming by not potentially wounding or killing an innocent Iraqi, by taking the time to go in and get the proper weapon. Why is that important? It's important because the people that you go lead will be just like this young man. They may not wear the uniform of a Marine. They very well may be wearing the uniform of a sailor. But they will be imbued with these virtues of the warrior ethos, and they will expect that you are imbued with these virtues. And America expects you to be imbued with these virtues. They don't expect you to be the smartest chemistry student in the world, or to be able to explain calculus when you get home on leave, or to be any of the other classes and classwork that you have. But what they do expect is that you will be women and men of character, that you will be leaders, that you came to this premier institution of leadership development and that you have learned something. And so you have expectations not only from the women and the men that you lead, but from America, because you're here. I might need a new battery, I'm not sure. When you were done with all of that, the virtues of the leader, you moved on. You talked about integrated leadership. I've touched on it a little bit before. I've touched on this idea that there are no superiors, there are only seniors, peers, and subordinates. And when you talked about that idea of integrated leadership, it's leadership in every environment. But I would offer this to you to think about. Peer leadership, the leadership opportunity that has presented itself since you arrived here last summer, that will continue to be one of those 5-meter targets, if you will, that you will have to face every day from now, literally as long as you're alive, is peer leadership. And peer leadership is difficult. In my mind, peer leadership is the most difficult form of leadership that there is. And whether it's midshipmen leading midshipmen, or whether it's commanders leading commanders, or whether it's Marine Corps captains leading Marine Corps captains, it matters not. Peer leadership is the most difficult, and it's the most difficult because you do it without positional authority. At the beginning of the class, you were all called to attention, and you all stood up at the position of attention. But if my 4-year-old daughter had been or granddaughter had been in the back, and she had heard that same phrase, and she walked in now and said, "Attention on deck," in that cute little voice that makes me smile every time I hear it, you would all simply turn around, right? Because she has no positional authority. You don't recognize her authority. And it's very much the same with your peers. You see, the only way you can succeed in peer leadership is by having moral authority. Moral authority over those you lead. They must understand, they must believe that what you want them to do is good for not only them, but it is good for the entire organization. Put it in context of where you're at today, for your squad, or your platoon, or your company. But take that broader to your class, or take that broader to this institution of the United States Naval Academy. You must be a leader at every level. You have to build that leadership toolkit. You've already lost 6 months. You have 3.5 years. But you never know when you're going to be called on to answer the bell. This is Second Lieutenant Whistler. This is my lovely bride of over 40 years. Those were cool glasses, by the way, in the day. I'm just saying, all right? So don't laugh at those. And I also can't tell you why I'm still married after 40 years, because I don't deserve to be. The woman's a saint. We have 6 kids. They're all wonderful young adults now because of her. But the most important person in this photo is this guy right here, Sergeant Daniel C. Wilkin. Sergeant Wilkin is a squad leader, 1st Squad, 3rd Platoon, Alpha Company, 3rd Combat Engineer Battalion. It's my very first platoon. I'd been in command about 3 months. We had been training in the field for a little over 2 weeks. We were on our way home from an island called Kaho'olawe, which people in Hawaii don't even train on anymore. And we were somewhere between Molokai and Lanai when the rear engine in a CH-46 helicopter exploded, and we started spiraling into the ocean. And immediately 3 of my Marines jumped up and came to me, screaming over the din and the roar in the back of the helicopter, and said, "I can't swim." My initial reaction was, "It sucks to be you." I didn't say that out loud. That leadership thing sort of kicked in. I said, man, I got to do something. But for a moment, there was actually a moment of embarrassment. I was embarrassed that I had 3 Marines that I didn't know how to swim. And you're saying, no, but that's impossible. What I would tell you is this. Every sailor, every Marine who gets through boot camp, quote, knows how to swim. It says so on a piece of paper. You can't get out of boot camp if you don't know how to swim. Except if you didn't know how to swim when you went to boot camp and you don't ever get in a pool or go swimming again for 2 years, let's say, after you get out of boot camp, you don't know how to swim. And this is not a good place to realize that. But I was sort of happy because I knew that there was only 2 water safety qualified guys in that platoon, Sergeant Wilkin and myself. So I said to Sergeant Wilkin, you take Hinojosa, and I'm going to take Tompkins and Pilcher, and we're going into the water, boys. And when we get out of this, we'll all just link up somewhere, and we'll wait to get saved by the next helicopter or ship or whatever they send to get us. And after about an hour in the water, sure as the world, we all got saved. Through the good graces of God and through great leadership from Sergeant Wilkin, no one lost their life. No one. We were given awards, but to be honest, it brought to the point to me that I hadn't spent time. I was in charge of all of the lives in that platoon, and I hadn't spent the time kneecap to kneecap to know everything I needed to know about those Marines that I led. But that second Lieutenant Whistler, it could be on you faster than that. 19 months ago, 7 midshipmen from the United States Naval Academy left to go on summer cruise. They got to Japan and they got on board the USS Fitzgerald, and the ship got underway that very next day. And the ship collided at sea with another ship, and 7 sailors on that ship were killed. 7 sailors lost their lives. But those 7 midshipmen saved other lives and helped their shipmates to save the ship. I don't think they were planning on having a collision at sea when they went out on youngster cruise. I don't think they were going, I don't have to worry about this leadership stuff yet because it's going to be a while before I get commissioned, before I have my second Lieutenant Whistler moment, right? You got to build that tool bag now. You don't know when you're going to be called to reach in there and grab out one of those leadership tools and be able to apply it in a situation that matters. And I would offer this. It could occur as soon as when you leave here. Heck, it could occur this weekend at Army-Navy. When one of your classmates is about to do something really stupid, are you going to be the leader? Are you going to be the motivated leader that steps in and makes a difference in their lives? Are you going to be that selfless servant leader that's built the relationship, that proves with moral authority that you are going to be the one that they can rely on? Or maybe it's when you go home on leave and it's not even one of your classmates, it's somebody at home who decides to do something stupid. Will you be that person that America expects to step in the breach with your leadership because you came from this fine institution? Are you going to be ready to accept? Is your tool bag, your toolkit, is it ready? Are you ready to reach in? Or are you carrying around one tool, a hammer? And when you got one tool that's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's just not the way the world is. There's a lot of things out there. You need a lot of tools. You need to build that toolkit now. It was said about Supreme Court Judge William P. Clark that virtually everything he set out to do, he succeeded in. But he did it because he realized that competence was more important than ambition, that judgment was more valuable than education, and that character was worth more than personality. So ask yourself, you've been given this great semester to study this theory of leadership and these ideas and who you are. And my challenge to you is to commit to leadership competence, to commit to leadership judgment, to commit to leadership character, to be women and men of character that make a difference, not only in their own lives, in your own life, but in the lives that they lead. in the lives that are around them, whether it's your seniors, whether it's your peers, whether it's your subordinates? And the answer to the question that you just got was, yes, you can lead your seniors. Your example will make them work harder. Your example will hold them to the standard. Your example can make a difference. You must commit yourself. You must commit yourself to being that selfless servant, warrior, leader. If you do that, you will have the most rewarding, the most successful, the most fulfilling career that you can imagine. And if you fail to do that, if you fail to take the next at least 3.5 years, if you have not done it now, you may find it to be the most challenging opportunity that faces you. So commit yourself to being that selfless servant, warrior, leader. I'm going to stop talking, and you're going to ask questions. And this is your opportunity to be that selfless servant leader for your classmates, because if you don't ask me questions, I'm going to point to somebody, and then that somebody will ask me a question. So you can be selfless and be the person who asks the first question while everybody else tries to figure out what they want to ask, okay? All right, so who's got a question? Sir.
So, fourth class Barbario, could you talk about one relationship you had, maybe as a second lieutenant, that had the biggest impact on you and your development as a leader?
Sure. Question was, what relationship did I have as young officer that made the biggest difference in my career? Gunnery Sergeant Robert C. Caldwell, United States Marine Corps, my very first platoon sergeant. Without a doubt, the biggest impact. He taught me what it meant to be a Marine, but more importantly, he taught me what it meant to be a leader. Gunnery Sergeant Caldwell was about 6'4". He went about 250. He had played AAA baseball in the White Sox organization. He was a stud. But in those days in the Marine Corps, we didn't do dead hang pull-ups. We kipped our pull-ups. And for whatever reason, Gunny Caldwell could not kip a pull-up to save his soul. But he could knock out 10 of the most beautiful dead hang pull-ups you've ever seen in your life. And I was trying to teach him how to kip, and he said, "Sir, it ain't about kipping, it's about upper body strength. 2 tours in Vietnam, you're training for the wrong mission." And we became fast friends, and things went really well. When I left Hawaii, he said, "Lieutenant, when you decide that you're going to get out of the Marine Corps, write me a letter." There was no email or text or anything back then. So I did. I wrote him a letter and said, "Hey, I'm getting out of the Marine Corps." And I got a letter back very shortly after that. And he said, "You can't get out of the Marine Corps." He said, "The Marine Corps needs leaders, and you're a leader. You may not be the best leader I've ever been around, but you're a leader. And I want you to stick around the Marine Corps." And he went through a whole litany of reasons and things that we had done and people. And at the end of the letter, he said, "Just do this. Just go back for one more assignment in the operating forces. Serve as a company commander. And if you're not having a good time, if you're not having fun, if you're not enjoying that challenge, then feel free to leave the Marine Corps." 39 years, 3 months, and 24 days later, I left the Marine Corps, okay? Biggest impact. I would offer it as a lesson to you. You're not only going to learn from your seniors, you're going to learn from your subordinates. I would offer you have this great collection of senior enlisted leaders here at the Academy, amazing men and women who know how to lead. Go and talk to them. Ask them a simple question. What do you expect of me the day I get commissioned? When I show up in your unit, what do you want me to do? What is your expectation? And I will tell you, what they expect is competence, compassion, and courage. They may say it differently, they may frame it in a different way, and then they'll be able to help you walk through how you build that competence, compassion, and courage. Who else has a question?
Sir, Richard, 4th class Hilliard. Where ambition, education, and personality are easy and tangible to develop, how is things like competence developed today?
So the question was, how do you develop your competence? I would offer you to develop your competence by a lifelong commitment to 2 things: your own professional education and through your continued development as a leader. And sometimes those things can intersect. So how do you develop your own professional military? This is a profession. It's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job. You don't go home. You don't put it on the shelf. You're invested. You do that by reading. I got some great guidance when one of my first company commanders. I joined 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, engineer platoon commander, assigned to Battalion Landing Team 3-3, getting ready to make my 2nd Westpac deployment. Pretty full of myself. Been on one deployment, sort of know what I'm doing. Go down to weapons company, check in. Who's the company commander? Captain James N. Mattis. I quickly realized I didn't know diddly about diddly. But one thing General Mattis did, he had everybody in that company reading professionally. And when I asked him later on about how do you frame what you read, he said, pick one battle, matters not what the reason, and read everything you can about it. Pick 2 leaders and read everything you can about them. I picked the Battle of Okinawa because my father, that was his first combat. He was a World War II, Korea, Vietnam veteran. And I picked Alexander the Great and General John A. Lejeune. And I've tried to read as much as I can. I haven't read everything there is about him. So that's how you build your competence. You commit yourself to the profession. You make yourself committed to this larger profession that's been going on since Cain and Abel met in the field. And then you also commit yourself to that idea of being a selfless servant leader. That's where you develop competence. I think we got time for another question. I'll come back to you. I promise I won't miss you.
Speaking of reading, do you have any good book recommendations?
Oh yeah. Have you? Sure. What's a good book recommendation? Anybody here read the book Gates of Fire? Perfect. It's easy. It's a historical fiction. It's about the Spartans fighting the Battle of Thermopylae. King Leonidas, he takes 300 Spartans, handpicked, certainly for their warrior ethos, but to be honest, and you read the book, and in history when you've read about it, he picked them for their families' commitment to what it meant to win or to lose that battle. He picked 300 and he knew that the 300 would not come back. And it's a great treatise, and at the end of the book, there's a discussion with a captured Greek, and he describes what it means to be a king. But in that description, just line out king and put in leader, and you'll get a great, great book on leadership. When you're done reading that one, shoot me an email and I'll give you another one. Bailey.
Shipper 4th Class Bailey. Sir, can you describe some times in your career where you were uncomfortable and some discomfort you experienced and how you approached it?
Uncomfortable in which way, Bailey? The question was describe some place I've been uncomfortable. You mean professionally uncomfortable with a decision or?
More morally.
Morally?
Yes, sir.
Sure, have a seat. When I was a brand new, I showed up as a captain right after the gunny told me to take one more tour. I'd finished a tour at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego and went up to 1st Combat Engineer Battalion, and I checked in, and I was a new guy. And in those days, if you were an engineer, you know, you were an East Coast guy or a West Coast guy, but I had started in Hawaii, so I wasn't an East Coast guy or a West Coast guy. And I showed up in a company that I'd never served with anybody in the battalion before. And passed my first test as the H&S company commander, but I noticed that the Charlie company commander was a bit of a fake. And he wasn't really training his Marines very hard. And yet, on paper, he looked really great in front of the battalion commander. And he was, like the battalion commander, this amazing triathlete. And they would go train together and they would do all these cool things together. And a couple of the Marines, and then I left H&S company, and some of the Marines that were with me went to Charlie, and I went to Bravo company as the Bravo company commander. And I would see these Marines, you know, early in the morning around the CP and whatnot, and they were just talking about how their company commander was never training with them. You know, he was never selfless servant sacrifice. There was never that shared hardship. And in fact, I went over to see him one day, and he got up really early to train, but then he would always take like a 2-hour nap in his office. And he would always say counseling in session on his door, which was a distinct violation of his integrity. And so I called him out on it. And the staff NCOs in the company were not very happy about that. And some of the other officers in the battalion, and I was not a very popular guy when that took place. But what happened over time, And the battalion commander became aware of it, replaced him as a company commander, and that company started to come around. And as that company started to come around, the morale and the enthusiasm and the professionalism that we've talked about today, from those junior Marines through the staff NCOs, became significantly better. And after a period of being sort of persona non grata as the new guy who calls out the sort of respected guy, I developed a professional relationship with my peers that has lasted to this day. Not all of them continued on as long as I did, and not all of them stayed even beyond 20 years. But yeah, very uncomfortable. And the reason I did it was because I had deployed down to Central America with some of these guys. We did a no-notice flyaway. There was a crisis. Everybody thought the Nicaraguans were going to attack the Hondurans. And some of his Marines didn't know diddly about what they were supposed to do. And it was because they were sort of just going through the motions and not doing the training. So that was what led me to sort of try and figure out what was going on. Okay? In issues like that, and you will run, if you haven't run into it yet, you will, even while you're here. If you sacrifice your honor or your integrity for loyalty, you will never get your honor or your integrity back. And even if it's hard, just make the decision based on the greater good, right? On the idea of honor and integrity. Your integrity for the warfighting ethos of that organization. And the loyalties piece will fix them. If people hold you accountable because you held, if they lose their loyalty to you because you hold somebody accountable for honor or for integrity, then they're not really holding you accountable for the right reasons. And it is hard, trust me. It's no fun. But it's really rewarding. And it'll take a while, but you'll get to the good part. I think we're done, right? I'm sorry to end that way. Final thing, Whistler, WISSLER, @usna.edu. If you want to come to my office and talk to me about anything, leadership, something going on, difficult decision you got to make, you want to talk to me about my Minnesota Vikings, got their butts kicked, whatever you want to talk about, I'll be glad to talk to you about it. I'm not here every day. Send me an email. We'll work something out. Some of your classmates have already sent me emails, so don't think you're going to be the only one going on 201 Echo in Loose Hall. Thanks. God bless each and every one of you. Beat Army!